Happening? Welcome in the Matt Bernier Show, DRF TV, live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. My name is Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. This is the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show, taking a look at some racing from this upcoming weekend. Well, yes and no. It's a little bit of a continuation from last week's preview show. Last week discussed the 2-year-old males from Saratoga and Del Mar. This week we'll discuss the 2-year-old fillies exiting Saratoga and Del Mar and where you may see them next. And overall, from a buyer speed figure standpoint, where they stack up, a couple of replays, as well as some PPs for some interesting runners that didn't crack the top 10 as far as fast figures are concerned. We will go over the Grade 1 Woodbine Mile. Happens to be the Saturday Woodbine play of the day, as well as the DRF race of the day. You can find all that and more over on video.drf.com, as well as the Daily Racing Forms YouTube channel. We'll also give you the NFL Week 2 Trifecta on the heels of a perfect 3-0 weekend in week number 1. If you listen to this podcast form, like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up. You get all the latest offerings from DRF TV. If you're over on iTunes, write us a review. Give us a positive rating. Always, always greatly appreciated. We kicked things off with the Saratoga boys last weekend. Let's go with the Del Mar girls this weekend. So a little bit more, hopefully a little bit more sort of tightened up way of doing this as opposed to last week. I'm going to rip through the 10 fastest 2-year-old figures for the girls, and then I'll kind of dissect them a little bit one by one, or go a little bit deeper into certain ones. So let's start off. The Del Mar 2-year-old females. In order, the top 10. Bellafina earned a 94 buyer in the Sorrento. Brill earned an 88 in a maiden special weight race. Mother an 87 in a maiden special weight. Chasing Yesterday an 86 in a maiden special weight. Sneaking Out an 85 in a maiden special. Del Mar May an 84 in the Sorrento. Bougie Girl an 84 in the Sorrento. Derlou an 83 in a maiden special weight. Fighting Mad an 82 in a maiden special. And Honey from the South an 82 in a maiden special. Many of those names are going to be familiar because you've seen some of them in graded stakes races already. You can very clearly tell that Bob Baffert is a strong hand because he has more than half of this list of the top 10. And that's just, these are strictly dirt horses. And I didn't filter it one way or the other, and you're going to see that because out at Saratoga, sort of the counterparts, the girls out there, there are a number of turf horses that ran faster than many of the dirt horses. So it feels like very clearly the West Coast dirt females are better than the East Coast dirt females at this point. But there is some room to sort of make a decision one way or the other if you fully believe in some of these figures or not. Because the big piece, the Sorrento, you saw that you had 3 horses in the top 10 as far as figures are concerned pop up here in this. You had Bellafina, you had Del Mar May, and you had Bougie Girl. They all came back and ran in the Del Mar Debutante, along with Brill, who earned that 88 buyer in her career debut for Jerry Hollendorfer. The problem is they come back and run in the Debutante, and all of them run considerably slower. First things first, let's take a look at the stretch run of the Del Mar Debutante. Here's Trevor Denman with the call.
Fina's the one to beat, drawing clear from Mother. Brill just did not fire today. They come for home, and it's Bellafina in front by 2. Mother battling on, but Bellafina's too good at the 16th pole. Coming on late is Bougie Girl. Bellafina will come home to score under Flavion Pratt. Takes the Del Mar Debutante. Mother second. Bougie Girl third. Then.
So the big piece there is if you look at a horse like Bellafina, she regressed tremendously. In fact, all 5 horses exiting the Del Mar Debutante regressed significantly from their prior races, which leads me to believe that it's one of 2 things. Either the initial figures for all 5 of these girls were incredibly high, and we're not talking about a minor regression. We're talking north of 15 to 20 points. Either the initial figure that they all earned was way too high, or the figure that was assigned to them from a buyer standpoint, and strictly from a buyer standpoint, from the Del Mar Debutante was entirely too low. And we've talked about projections, and it is not an exact science. There needs to be a little bit of subjectivity in there in order to make these figures. But I just have a very difficult time believing that all 5 of the girls that ran in that Debutante, all of them regressed, and didn't regress a little bit, regressed substantially. I just have a hard time imagining that. Now, perhaps the initial figures were a little bit on the inflated side, but then that leads us to potentially even a deeper and darker rabbit hole that if all of those figures are too large and too high, were some of these other figures too high? I bring up the initial figures, maybe it's something to keep in mind because you have a horse like Chasing Yesterday who came back, and she maybe have had excuses, But she showed up at Saratoga and regressed significantly. So there's some things that you as a handicapper need to make a decision. What you think? Do you believe that all of these numbers are sort of, I don't want to say accurate, but do you think that they are truly indicative of the talent and the level of ability of all of these girls? Or do you think that you can poke some holes in them? The only reason that I showed that replay, and only that replay, as opposed to the Sorrento and opposed to some of the other maiden special weight races, and again, I've made it clear, Del Mar did a tremendous job for the entirety of their meeting. You can head on over to the YouTube channel that they have, and you can basically find every single race, the entirety of the gate load, the entirety of the race, and the entirety of the gallop out, plus the winner's circle ceremony. So really, I mean, Del Mar sets the bar here as far as replays are concerned over on YouTube, and they're all in beautiful high def. It's tremendous. Which is, by the way, it's about time. It's the end of 2018. Everybody should be in high def at this point. I don't care if you're the smallest racetrack or the most giant operating system. You know who I'm talking about. The thing here, again, with these girls, you need to just make a call yourself. And we won't know fully until they come back and they try other spots. Sounds like many of these girls are going to end up in the Chandelier here in a few weeks out at Santa Anita, going 2 turns for the first time. You need to make a call. Do you believe these figures, or do you believe that this is the talent level that we're talking about? Or do you believe that the debutante is a little bit more indicative of where they actually stack up? 2 fillies that I want to discuss that are not in the top 10 as far as the speed figures are concerned. And again, keep in mind, those 10 names that I just rattled off, those are the 10 fastest figures earned by 2-year-old fillies at the Del Mar meeting. Doesn't matter surface, dirt or turf. The 2 fillies, though, that I am very interested in taking a look at are turf horses. And, okay, they didn't crack the top 10 as far as figures are concerned, but they both look like they have a ton of ability, and they've both done some good things already on the racing track. Let's take a look at Summering for Tom Proctor. Goes out for Glen Hill Farm. Drayden Van Dyke has ridden her in both of her lifetime starts. You can take a look at the PPs. She has paired up 74 Beyer speed figures in her career debut, as well as winning the Juvenile Fillies Turf down at Del Mar most recently. I like the fact that Juvenile Turf, she showed the ability, she came to hand a little bit better. That first race, she just went out there, and you can see those fractions. She went 22-1, 46-1, 10-4 for 3/4. Then she comes back in the Juvenile Fillies Turf, and she sits off of a target pretty comfortably, all things considered, and I like the way that she finished. She kicked home very, very well, and usually, to me, that is still the ultimate sign of a quality turf horse. If you have that big finish, you need to be looking for that. If you're a formulator user, I would strongly suggest you go in for turf races and change the pace, or change the fractions from elapsed to incremental, because you want to see what that last sort of kick is. Because ultimately on turf, that's what matters the most. How many of these girls or boys, doesn't matter, age as well, doesn't matter, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and older, whatever. How many of them have a legitimate sort of turn of foot to come home and try to run down whoever's in front of them? Now, you pair a nice turn of foot with major tactical speed like Summering is displayed already in 2 lifetime starts, then you're dealing with a horse that the sky is the limit potential-wise. Sounds like she is going to go to the Surfer Girl. I believe that's going to be one of the first weeks at Santa Anita, maybe the second week. I could be wrong. You can take a look. I'm sure that's over on drf.com somewhere. But she may be facing another horse that I think is quite talented, another filly that actually ran the same day as Summering, just ran a little bit earlier in the card, or later in the card, excuse me. That's Rihanna for Bob Baffert. Now, we know that Baffert is not typically a turf trainer, but this filly, she went out there. You see that she's got a nice little pedigree. Scat Daddy out of a Speightstown mare. They paid $130,000 for it at the Keeneland September 17 sale. She went out there and just showed legit speed and kept going on and didn't stop. Now, that runner-up Colonial Creed, the only reason I was a little bit concerned about the race as a whole was there wasn't a lot of running going on from the back of the pack. But at the end of the day, when you look at the figures that this girl was throwing down and the way that she did it, she was very, very professional. She looked comfortable all throughout, setting those fast fractions. I think there's reason to believe that she's the goods. And I know you look at it, you say she's an Arkansas bred. What are we doing? No, I think there's some legitimate ability here. For what it's worth, she earned a Beyer speed figure 5 points faster than either of the 2 races that Summering has run to date thus far. I think I still prefer Summering over Rihanna at this point, but they're still so lightly raced, you have no idea. If they're looking big picture and thinking Breeders' Cup, Juvenile Fillies Turf, I think they're going to be interesting. They've got to get through one thing at a time, though. Let's get through a race like that Surfer Girl out Santa Anita, see what they can do there, and if that leads them on to Churchill Downs down in Louisville the first weekend in November, then perhaps you can talk about bigger and better things. unfortunately for them, there's a couple of monsters, I think, out on the East Coast. We'll talk about them more momentarily. So there's a quick look at the 2-year-old fillies from Del Mar on dirt and on turf. I think I am most interested, to be honest with you, probably in the fillies on turf, just simply because Bellafina, mechanically, I still think there are some things to iron out. She is fast, there's no question about it, but mechanically, she's either very, very late with the lead change or she doesn't change leads at all. Brill needs to prove that that sort of just disaster in the debutante was nothing more than just a bad day, because she was so impressive breaking her maiden in her career debut. Mother, I still think is okay, but she just ran okay. Chasing Yesterday, we'll talk about her momentarily from Saratoga. Bougie Girl, maybe she's one that you want to think about throwing in a DRF horse watch. They worked her on turf at one point. I do wonder if that juvenile turf sprint come Breeders' Cup time, I wonder if that comes into play for them, because I don't think she's really a two-turn kind of horse, but I do wonder maybe that's an option for her. And one other horse to keep in mind from that list, Derlou, is another Baffert horse. Shocking. She was outworking Chasing Yesterday before either one of them made their career debuts, and outworking her quite convincingly. Now, the only thing I'm a little bit concerned with Derlou, so far the race that she exits hasn't come back all that strong. She beat a few horses that have come back to earn buyers in the mid to high 60s, so perhaps it was just, I don't know, maybe she was just better than those horses that day, and that's not necessarily going to be an omen of things to come for her, but just a few pieces of note there with those horses. But to me, I think the fillies on turf are pretty good. I think Summering, she has the pedigree. Summering is a daughter of Wishing Gate. We know what Wishing Gate was capable of on her best day. She's a multiple graded stakes winner going long on the turf. And you've got a decent little pedigree for Rayanna, the Arkansas bred. So I think there's some interesting things to come out of that. The dirt horses, you need to wait and see. Do you believe the debutante number? Do you believe that the initial figs that they earned were too high? Do you believe that the debutante number is too low? So many different pieces of that. And the problem is the sample, you've only got, for many of these girls, 2 races. You're going to need to wait and see, I think, at least one more race to make a fair determination on what you think of the races prior. So some good stuff happened out at Del Mar with the 2-year-old fillies. Now, as I made mention a little bit earlier, the turf horses out at Saratoga. I think they were actually the stars of the 2-year-old division for the girls. Let's shift our attention east. Out to Saratoga for the 2-year-old fillies. And as I made mention with the Del Mar horses when talking about these Saratoga ones, just because Del Mar didn't have any turf horses in the top 10 crack the top 10 speed figures for the meet, doesn't mean that there aren't some talented ones out there as far as the grass is concerned. The difference for Saratoga is there were a number of turf horses that cracked the top 10 as far as speed figures are concerned, and I don't know if that's necessarily meaning it's a positive and a strong group of 2-year-old fillies on grass out there, or maybe it's more an indictment on the 2-year-old fillies on dirt. Either way, here are the top 10, and then we'll go into a few of them a little bit more in depth. Feedback earned an 85 for Chad Brown on dirt in a maiden special weight race. Catherine the Great, an 84, winning the Schuylerville on opening weekend up there. Concrete Rose earned an 82 in a maiden special weight race on turf. Stillwater Cove, an 80 in the Bolton Landing on turf. Sippican Harbor, a 78 in a maiden special weight victory for her. Newspaper of Record, a 78 for Chad on a turf for a turf horse in a maiden special weight affair. Excuse me. Introduced, 77 in a maiden special weight on turf. Sippican Harbor, she earned a 77 buyer, winning the Spinaway. We'll talk about that race more in a moment. Lyrical Lady, a 76 on dirt in a maiden special weight, and Lady TNT, a 75 in a maiden special. Let's start off with Feedback. She was the fastest 2-year-old filly on dirt, or turf for that matter. She was the fastest 2-year-old filly up at Saratoga from a speed figure standpoint. Take a look at the PPs here. She earned an 85, winning by 8 lengths. You see that they paid $85,000 for her at the Keeneland November 16 sale. She's by Violence out of a Tail of the Cat mare. The Dam, honest answer, she is a sibling to I Ain't Bluffing. I Ain't Bluffing won the Grade 1 La Brea, and she won multiple other graded stakes races, so there is some pedigree here. You have to question a little bit how far she wants to go. That would be my first concern. Is she going to be more of that one-turn kind of horse? You never know. We'll find out. The other thing that I would just throw out there, based on these PPs, her most recent work was on September the 2nd. We are now, this is being recorded on September the 13th. We haven't had a work since. I would suggest keeping an eye on that. If she doesn't have a work here in the next day or two, then you got to start to be a little bit concerned that maybe she's had a little bit of a physical issue and she's going to need a little bit of time. If that's the case, then maybe you're probably looking at a horse that's better suited for a 3-year-old campaign as opposed to a 2-year-old campaign, because we're getting closer and closer to the big preps leading into the Breeders' Cup. As far as some of the other horses are concerned, let's talk about the Grade 1 winner, Sippican Harbor. Sippican Harbor, when she won her maiden special weight race in an off-the-turf race by 100 lengths, people said, well, she defeated a bunch of turf horses and she just handled the dirt a little bit better than everyone else. But the Fig came back respectable with a 78. She comes back and follows that up with a pretty convincing grade 1 score. Here's Larry Colmus with the stretch run of this year's Spinaway.
Side of them, chasing yesterday is outside of Restless Rider for the final furlong. It is Nona Madeline digging in on the inside. Bella Chow, Restless Rider alongside. Chasing yesterday, Sipacan Harbor is closing down the center of the track as well, and then it's reflected behind them. Here comes Sipacan Harbor. Sipacan Harbor, she's the real deal. She won the Spinaway. And then it was rest.
Now, the concern there with that effort, as impressive as it looked visually, one, the pace melted down. She took advantage of it, which I don't really want to hold against her, but because I kind of like the fact that she won in gate-to-wire fashion in the maiden special weight score, and then she came back and won from basically last in that Spinaway. But the Fig came back a little bit light. You see that her Spinaway victory actually came back slower than her maiden score. So now you got to make a decision. Do you think that this filly, again, based visually, she checks many boxes. She looks like she's going to want an additional distance. She's by Orb. Maybe turf will still be something that she wants down the road. But from a figure standpoint, she doesn't have any real edge on any of her competition, and especially when we talk about the 2-year-olds out on the West Coast, depending on which figures you believe. If you believe the races prior to the debutante or you believe the debutante, then who knows? Basically, what I'm saying is this 2-year-old filly dirt group, I still think they are very talented, and I had said at the beginning of the meeting, of those meetings, Del Mar and Saratoga, that I felt like it was a pretty strong group. I'm not ready to give up on it just based on 1 or 2 slow races because they've only had 2 or 3 races total. I want to wait and see. Give them another race. Once you get a little bit more of a sample size, I think then you can start to definitively say, I don't want to say definitively, that's not the right word, but you can have a stronger opinion and say, you know what, I don't think they're as good as some other people do, or vice versa. I think they're all that in a bag of chips. As far as the turf horses are concerned, and I think these are sort of the interesting ones, just simply because there were so many of them that ran as fast as they did. There was one in particular, though, that I would very strongly urge you to go back to an edition of Out of the Gate toward the end of the Saratoga meeting. Mike Beer made a horse called Newspaper of Record his horse watch. I'm going to take a look at the PPs right now. You see she earned a 75 in her career debut. She won by almost 7 lengths. She was a little bit green and goofy down the stretch, but holy smokes, you want to talk about a turn of foot? This filly looks like she could be a monster. I realize that was over yielding ground. Perhaps she appreciated it a little more than the others did, but based on that effort right there, she's looking like she could be a monster going forward. And the reason I had said with the 2-year-old fillies out on the West Coast with Summering and Rihanna that they may end up facing a pretty solid one on the East Coast, I think Newspaper of Record might be a monster. She could be that next. It seems like for all the good horses that Chad Brown has had, it feels like there is always a female in his stable that is really sort of, she's the queen. She's the best of the best. She's better than the male horses. She's better than all the other girls. For the longest time, it was Lady Eli. Now you can make the argument that it's Sister Charlie. Perhaps Newspaper of Record is the one that sort of takes that mantle going forward as time goes by. I know it's only one race. If you haven't seen it again, I'd encourage you to head back over and take a look at that earlier edition of Out of the Gate from a few weeks back, because Beer made her the horse watch for him that week, and my goodness, she looks tremendous. I'm be very interested to see where she goes. And if they get to a race like the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies Turf, we know Chad has had plenty of success in that race, particularly at Churchill Downs. Newspaper of Record is a name I think you're going to want to get used to if you don't already know it. So again, these 2-year-old fillies out at Saratoga, it feels like the dirt horses maybe and the turf horses might be a little bit better than what we had seen out on the West Coast. That's not to, disparage the turf horses on the West Coast. I thought those 2 fillies that I made mention were both very good. But it feels like just strictly from the top 10 as far as the fastest figures are concerned, the data would suggest that the turf horses on the East Coast are slightly stronger as opposed to the West Coast horses. And really, I think it's more sort of a reflection of the 2-year-olds as a whole, where maybe the fillies on dirt on the West Coast are far superior to the fillies on the East Coast on dirt. And that's why maybe you have more of those East Coast turf horses actually getting into the top 10 as opposed to the West Coast turf horses getting into the top 10. Hopefully all that made sense. Again, just a little bit of an exercise here. Some of these names that maybe you're already familiar with and some that maybe you're not familiar with just yet, that you're probably going to want to get used to and get accustomed to going forward. Maybe it's not for Breeders' Cup time, but you can probably guess that some of these girls are going to continue to improve and perhaps be big 3-year-old players in some of the big races going into next year. If there are any other 2-year-olds, male or female, that there are any questions about, again, as always, feel free to fire away at me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt or beneath the video player on the YouTube channel. I can take a look and pull up PPs and go over and discuss some things too. So let's shift. This will be the first race that we've actually previewed in the past 2 weeks in the preview edition. And I kind of feel like it's a big one. It's a fun one. Great betting race. You can go a few different ways. Let's take a look at the DRF race of the day for Saturday, along with the Woodbine Saturday play of the day. It is the Grade 1 Woodbine Mile. Grade 1 Woodbine Mile on a day of just giant racing up at Woodbine on Saturday afternoon. There are a few Grade 1s. There are multiple stakes races all over the place. And then on Sunday, you've got big racing as well with some 2-year-old Grade 1 action. Let's talk about the Woodbine Mile, though. This is the main event of the entire Woodbine meeting. Take a look at the field. On the far right side, you have my odds. It's a value line. It is not the morning line. It's what I think represents fair value on each one of these horses from a win standpoint. Normally, I used to do all this, and then I stopped doing it. I'm doing it here because I'm not working on Saturday. Otherwise, this would have been a DRF Live post. But I figured since this is going to be the only opportunity to discuss this race with value, let's do it here. The number 1, Good Samaritan, I made him 9-1. The number 2, La Sardane, 99-1. The filly taking on the boys. The number 3, Delta Prince, 3-1. The 4, Vanish, 99-1. 5, Mr. Haverkamp, 6-1. The 6, Lord Glitters, 6-1. The 7, Oscar Performance, 5-1. The 8, Divisadero, 10-1. And the 9, Stormy Antarctic, 9-1. Again, those are just what I would consider fair odds as far as win contenders are concerned. Let's go through sort of in order. Delta Prince, think he makes all the sense in the world. He has a victory already at Woodbine at the one-turn configuration. You know that's not going to be an issue for him, whereas for some of these other horses it could be because that stretch just goes forever and ever and ever. You know that's not an issue for him. He ran very well, highest last out buyer in the field, coming in second in that 4-star Dave behind Voodoo Song with a 104. I think Delta Prince makes plenty of sense in here. You have to talk about this race from a pace standpoint, though. I think one of the main pace sort of players in this spot is Oscar Performance. The question now for Oscar Performance is what the hell happened in the Arlington Million, because he was vanned off. He was eased, basically didn't finish the race. They vanned him off. They've hemmed and hawed about coming to this spot. They ultimately choose to run him here. The good Oscar Performance is very capable of winning this race, evidenced by that run 2 starts back in the poker, which was tremendous. If we get something obviously like the Arlington Million, he has no chance. But from a pace standpoint, in a race that lacks a ton of early foot, I think Oscar Performance is a little bit interesting in here. Let price be your guide, though. Don't take anything too short on him. The local hope, Mr. Haverkamp. I think talent-wise, he's very, very strong. He clearly loves Woodbine. He's 4-for-4 lifetime over the Woodbine turf. My only concern with him, as big a fan as I am of his, it feels like when he has been tested, he hasn't passed the test. When he faces slightly inferior company, he looks like a superstar. Saturday is his opportunity to try to prove that he is every bit as good as he looks like be the guide. You got to take a look at the odds. If he goes off somewhere in that 8-1 range, I think he's very interesting. If he is sort of the hometown hero and he goes off at 4-1 or 9-2, that does nothing for me. I'm interested in a horse, actually in one other one to discuss, Divisadero, who I've always been a fan of, but I've said it multiple times. I want him to run well on Saturday, but not well enough. I still want them to be pointing toward the Breeders' Cup Mile at Churchill Downs. Churchill Downs is his course. He loves the grass down beneath the Twin Spires in Louisville. I want them to get him there in good order, but I don't want him to peak too soon. And when I say peak too soon, I just don't want him to win one of these big races so his odds are deflated. I think people are a little bit skeptical of Divisadero. You get him to Churchill Downs, I think he's just going to take his game to a totally different level, and hopefully he's going to be at least a double-digit price. Here on Saturday, I think he has a puncher's chance. Don't love his chances, though. Horse I'm going to pick, though, at what should be a square price. Although I'm starting to get a little bit concerned. I know the DRF National Handicapper Mike Watchmaker likes him. I've seen a few other folks on Twitter discussing this horse. I like Good Samaritan. Good Samaritan is the number 1 horse for Bill Mott, Joel Rosario. The shades come off. Now, this is a horse that has not run on turf since July 8th of 2017. That was in the Belmont Derby going 1.25 miles. I think he is, I've said for a long, long time, go back and listen to any of these previews that we've done for him recently, whether it was the Met Mile, whether it's the Ali Sheba, you name it. I think, the Whitney, I think he's a turf horse. And he just started getting going, and he did as well as he did on the dirt. And I can understand there's more money to be had on the dirt. But at the end of the day, I think he is a turf horse. And specifically, I think he's probably best suited for this one-turn sort of configuration. And I have a little bit of evidence to back that up. And I know it was a long time ago. You got to go way back in the Wayback Machine. But go back to September 18th of 2016. Second lifetime start for Good Samaritan. Happened to be at Woodbine. Happened to be going a one-turn mile. It was in the Grade 2 Summer Stakes. We're going to take a look at that replay right now. And sure, he gets a little bit goofy at the end of the race and pops back to his left lead. Keep in mind, this was his first time against winners, first time shipping, and he was a 2-year-old. He comes back and runs arguably the best race in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, considering he was 150 wide throughout. Then he comes back off of a 6-month layoff and only gets beaten by a neck in the American Turf. They follow that up with the Pennine Ridge. There was no pace in that race. He came with a big late finish. He got his final eighth of a mile in 10.9. That is off the charts fast. Then he comes back in the Belmont Derby, another race that did not have any sort of real pace signed on. He finishes very, very well, gets his final quarter in 22:14. Then they go to the dirt, and we haven't seen him back on the turf since. The pace could be a little bit of a concern, where if he doesn't get enough to run at, then maybe that's going to dull that late kick, and he's going to have too much to do down the lane. I think he is a turf horse. I think I'm happy that they're at least going back to it with him, and the only reason I can think that they're doing it now is that maybe now they believe these are the same connections behind Yoshida. And perhaps they believe that Yoshida now is the dirt hope for them. He is a Grade 1 winner on the dirt. He's a Grade 1 winner on the turf. And it sounds like they're going to the Classic with him. Good Samaritan, all of a sudden, let's say he runs well here. Now you have a new opening. You have a new option, a new alternative for him, where you could be pointing to a race like the Breeders' Cup Mile. Even if he runs well. Let's say he doesn't win on Saturday, but if he runs well, perhaps then you look at it and say he can still run, and we know he likes Churchill Downs, and a mile is well within his range. I'm going to go with Good Samaritan in the Woodbine Mile. I made him 9-1. I don't think I would want anything too much less than that. I believe he's 10-1 on the morning line. If you told me that if push comes to shove, 7-1, maybe I would consider it. But anything too much less than that, I'm going to say no, just because there are other very talented horses in here. In order, I'm going to go Good Samaritan over Delta Prince, over Mr. Haverkamp, over the number 6 horse, Good Lord Glitters, coming in from Europe for David O'Mara. David O'Mara has had success in this race in the past. He won it in 2015 with Mondialiste. Really, the key to the race, though, is Oscar Performance. If Oscar Performance can still run, he has a giant tactical advantage on everyone else, including Delta Prince, including Good Samaritan, including you name it. He has just a tremendous edge. I just have no idea what happened in the Arlington Million. And usually I don't like going and backing horses off of disastrous efforts without any real sort of excuse. There you have it. The Grade 1 Rico Woodbine Mile. Good Samaritan for me in the 8th race at Woodbine. But again, a great day of racing all over the place at Woodbine. Got stakes action galore. We're going to button this up, and we're going to quickly take a look at the NFL Week 2 trifecta and hopefully build on a very positive Week 1. Wrap things up on the preview edition with the NFL Week 2 trifecta. Week 1, bang, batting 1,000, 3 for 3. Hopefully, keep the ball rolling along and keep the momentum going and build with Week 2 here. The 3 games. First one, Philadelphia Eagles, defending Super Bowl champions at Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs catching 3.5 points. The Bucs with the upset of all upsets in Week 1. They go into New Orleans and they drop, half 100 on the Saints, more or less. I think it was a combination of things. Week 1, the hallmark for Week 1 anyway to me was just garbage football. It was terrible. There were entertaining games, but there were not many well-played games. You had a bunch of teams really lay eggs, including the Saints. And really, I think including the Eagles. I know the Eagles won on opening night last Thursday, but they beat a team in Atlanta that looked even worse than they did. So I don't think either one of those teams looked particularly strong. The Eagles now go into Tampa, and we can say what we want about Tampa. I don't think they're particularly good. Ryan Fitzpatrick finds a way to get the job done. He has for the past 100 years. And I, respect another man with a big beard. I like that. I'm always going to be a fan of that. Harvard grad, up this way. I just think that there's a scenario where the Eagles, you know what, that opening week win, sure, they got the job done, but in less than spectacular form. And the Bucs, maybe they can't win this game, but I think you're catching 3.5 at home. I would even take them outright. That would just be my play. But give me the points. If you're going to give me points on a team that has a victory and they're in good form, clearly, they gave up 40 points themselves, but that's neither here nor there. Bucs plus 3.5 at home against Philadelphia. Give me the points at home. Carolina plus 6 at Atlanta. Carolina looked like complete hot garbage against the Cowboys. But again, just two teams that didn't look particularly good on opening week. Hopefully they're going to move forward here. The Falcons looked equally as bad, if not worse. And I still just think this number is way too big. It's still Newton. It's still McCaffrey. And I know McCaffrey had that little hiccup early on in the game on Sunday afternoon where he coughed up the ball. But Atlanta, I'm just not sold on them either. And Julio should have gone for 250 yards if Matt Ryan could hit him. But instead he didn't. He still had a giant game. I think he had over 150 yards. The Falcons need to button some things up, and I just don't believe that they are legitimately a touchdown better than the Panthers are at this point. And I understand that you're getting 3 points for the home field advantage, but if you're going to give me 6 for the Panthers on the road, I'll take that. Give me Carolina plus 6. And then the last game we'll discuss, the Miami Dolphins plus 3 at the New York Jets. The Dolphins scored out with them last weekend. That was positive. That was good. And that was a game which lasted about 18 hours because of the lightning storms and the delays. I think Tennessee is overrated. I said that last week. I don't think they're particularly strong. And now Mariota's banged up and, you lose Delaney Walker. I thought Deion Lewis looked good, but that's another story for another day. The Dolphins, I don't think they're good, but I don't think they're a disaster either. And the Jets, I think people are going to overreact a little bit. The Jets beat a bad team in Detroit. And I know you've got Matt Stafford. I know they've got Golden Tate and, Marvin Jones and you name it. Kenny Golladay looks good, but the Jets are not that. The Jets are not going to be putting up 48 points every week. They just happen to catch. And by the way, that game was 17-17 for a little while, and then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. I think the Dolphins are much closer to the Jets than it would seem. And again, just based on the numbers, they're given that's what the situation is with the points. The Jets are playing at home. That's why they're going to carry that 3-point advantage. But still, I just think the Dolphins going on the road, I think they're going to be okay. Keep this thing within. I think it's going to be a gross game, but I think it'll be within that sort of field goal one way or the other. And if that's the case, give me the Dolphins plus 3. So a quick recap. 3-0 in week 1. We try to build on it in week 2. Eagles at Bucks. Bucks plus 3.5. Give me the Bucks plus 3.5. Panthers at Falcons. Panthers plus 6. Give me the Panthers plus 6 on the road. And the Dolphins plus 3 at the New York Jets. Give me the Dolphins plus 3 on the road. There you have it. NFL Week 2 trifecta here on the preview edition. If you've been listening live.drf.com, livestream.com, the Daily Racing Forms Twitter handle, at DRF Inside Post, as well as the Daily Racing Forms Facebook page. Thank you for doing so. If you listen to podcasts like most of you do, YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, video.drf.com, as well as Spotify. If you're over on YouTube, click that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up. Over on iTunes, write us a review, give us a positive rating. Always greatly appreciated. Questions, comments, concerns, fire away at me on Twitter, at Bernier_Matt, or beneath the video player on the YouTube channel. I will be back with the recap edition beginning of next week. We'll have all sorts of stuff going on from Woodbine. We'll also have some nice racing from Belmont Park as well, I'm sure sprinkled in there, and a number of other things, along with the weekend's best buyer speed figure performances and things of that nature, as we do always on the review edition. However you're playing this weekend, whatever you're playing and wherever you're playing, best of luck. I will be back at the beginning of next week. This has been the preview edition of the Matt Bernier Show.